Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy.
This episode is one of 2024's Family Business Focus episodes where once a month I'm going to be talking with the leaders at a family business about some of the best practices that they've found are useful for them and potentially to pass on to both new family coming into their business and people in other family businesses. This episode is one of our family business conversations, and today I'm joined by John Gallagher of Gallagher Uniform, I think it is. It used to be Gallagher Brothers, I knew it as, but he'll correct me on all of that. Welcome, John, and just paint me a quick picture of your organization and the family business ties within.
Okay, greetings, David. Glad to be here. Gallagher Uniform is a family-owned and operated industrial laundry and uniform company, founded in 1893 in Detroit, Michigan, by my great-grandfather, John Cornelius Gallagher.
Now, it's in the family.
I'm glad I didn't get that middle name thrown on me. I'm not sure I'd survived middle school. So, my grandfather was the only son who worked with my great-grandfather, and then my dad was the only son, and his sister did not want to get into the business. And then Dad had four sons, and we ran it together for 35 years, and grew it from one type of family company. It was industrial laundry, but much more tailored in the uniform rental business. And we serve business and industry throughout lower Michigan and northern Indiana.
Okay, and so that's the main piece is uniform rental and laundry, and
it's primarily uniform rental. So companies like Pfizer and Perigo and Denso, and I don't know if I can mention.
You can mention any clients you want to mention. They're your clients, so congratulations.
So yeah, they are. We specialize in large accounts, but in complex accounts, but we also go right to the local store and local shop to provide uniform service. And then with that, you get ancillary products like floor mats and towels and facility service products.
Okay, cool. And mostly Southwest Michigan, Northern Indiana?
Yes, we're strong. Obviously, it was in Battle Creek for years. It was very local for really most of my dad's time in Detroit or in Battle Creek. Then the brothers, to feed more Gallaghers, you had to expand your service area. So Grand Rapids and Southwest Michigan has been very good to us. And then we did start going into Indiana and Fort Wayne because some customers took us there. And then and recently we're back in Detroit where it all started.
So 140 years later.
Yeah. Well, we left in 75. My dad sold the Detroit plant. So we moved to Battle Creek in 76. And then, and for various reasons, that was a tough business in Detroit, where the business was located. And Battle Creek was doing better with Kellogg Company. So Dad put his eggs all in one basket, and then we grew it from there. But now the market is really ready for a family-owned independent laundry service and uniform rental company because it's all served by national providers. So we like to compete.
So what's interesting to your industry, so you've got a lot of people will know the names of the national providers. I won't share any of them on here because that doesn't help anybody. But your niche is, hey, we're family owned. We have been for nearly 150 years. We serve you like we would serve our family.
Correct. And it's the independent laundries around the country really do compete well. Those that didn't compete usually got bought up, but the ones that are remaining, we're doing a very good job with being in front of the national competition on technology, certainly on service, and that passion to really provide when you own the company and the name's on the side of the truck, it makes a big difference. So
yeah.
We like to compete with them, and we can even compete on price. They don't have a lock on that either, so it's fun.
So there's the Gallagher advert out of the way, but I'm interested. Yeah. So It's interesting the way you framed it as well. So you're fourth generation, but the
Correct.
first three generations went to only one individual. Your generation went to four. How did you
Yes.
manage that that going to four siblings to take over the company?
Well, and we're all within 2 years of age too. So, it was rapid fire.
Or
And
within, so there's 2 years between each of the four of you.
yes,
Yeah.
roughly, plus or minus a couple
And
months.
well, just before you get it, where do you fit in that birth order?
Youngest.
And so you're the youngest, you're
I'll
the
show you the
last one of
skeleton, you know.
last one of the four still there. And
Last one standing, the three have retired. My brother Mike came in first. Pat followed him, and they were 75, 74, and 75 after they graduated from Michigan State, and then Dan followed, and then myself. So yeah, we all had our own. We all follow Dad's lead to say take as many business courses as you can and get your business degree to help run the laundry. We had been working there during summers, during college, and even summers in high school, uh, which looking back was another long story. But so we were kind of born and raised in the business. And so there was plenty of work to do to grow the business. Not only that, but my dad was still purchasing some stock and from his mom. So there were actually four brothers to feed, my dad and my grandmother.
okay, so there was still the three generations of ownership in there,
Yes,
even if it wasn't active.
right, correct.
Right. And so then, you all graduate from Michigan State, go green, and all that kind of stuff. And this has been your only job,
It has been my only job,
and the same for
other
your
than
three
volunteer
siblings.
work around the community, right?
Yeah, yeah. For those that know John, he sits on just about every board in the Greater Battle Creek area, or has done at some point, including being mayor, I think, at one point.
That's
Yeah.
true.
So,
93
so
to 95.
yeah, so a great community advocate, servant as well. But going back to those brothers, so you joined the company one at a time as you hit your 2 year kind of window after each other. Did that naturally then put a hierarchy into the organization? Was Mike the oldest one, obviously the boss?
Well, Dad was still president of the company, um, and Mike came in and was, we really didn't uh, those early years with my dad and my two oldest brothers. Mike came in and he was much more mechanically minded, and so he gravitated to managing the plant and the work that was involved with machinery and equipment and repairs and so forth. That worked out kind of nice. Pat was more of the sales type, his profile. So he did. He started up a sales process, and um, that worked. And Dan also was more of a plant administrative mind. And so he joined Mike in the plant, and I was more sales and service oriented. So, we kind of split it up. And Dad was still president, but unfortunately, Dad had a very debilitating stroke the very first year I came into the business. So it scrambled a lot of plans, quite unfortunately. So, but he stayed with the company and on the payroll and gave all he could to the company in a great way, even though he was out of the day-to-day operation. And then the four brothers, it was management by committee for a while, but tip your hat to Mike as oldest in the plant. And he eventually became president after Dad stepped aside.
Well, it's interesting because you're not the first of my interviews to say, well, Dad got sick and then we were all thrown in.
Yeah.
But so that was the four of consensus, but with that acknowledgement that Mike was a little bit older and if necessary, he had the casting vote.
I don't recall that we really, yeah, I guess I would say that now that I look back on it. But we really, Pat also brought in computers, back in the early 80s. We got our first computer. It was his passion. Mike and Dan weren't quite sure they wanted anything to do with that. I liked the idea. So, I followed Pat in that area. So everybody had their strengths that, and I think each brother knew that the other brother knew his stuff a little better than I did. So, So you kind of defer to the one that was passionate about a certain part of the work and that was doing it well.
That's cool. And where I first got involved with working with you was when on the day that or the time that Mike decided to retire.
Yes.
So this is now, after the 70s when everybody comes in, we're now into the ooze, and the eldest decides to retire. How did you manage through that? If the person who was the kind of de facto, the named CEO, and then, did it feel like it goes to the next oldest?
Well, we actually, that was 2013 when he retired, I believe. But I was named president of the company prior to that. Mike stepped aside shortly after Dad died in 2005, and all four brothers decided I was well suited for the position. So that was a bit of a twist. Mike was gracious and said, it's time that I step away and you keep rocking and rolling. And it wasn't a position that Pat and Dan had a severe craving to have. So that worked out well. A little bit of maneuvering went on, and away we go. So when Mike retired, I was already in place.
So was that intentional, or would you think that was intentional on the part of Mike and your dad?
Which part?
But just so the maneuvering to put you in the president role, and I'm assuming that was you took the president role from your dad. Mike had the CEO role.
No, we really have only had the position of president.
Okay.
We're old school, president, vice president. The C stuff we never quite latched onto. We're not too into the titles. So Dad had passed away in 2005, and so we had some talks before he died, and I knew what he wanted to have done, and he saw some things that way. And Mike also said, the company's getting bigger. We've got to really, I don't need to be in this role, and so he was kind of the board, chair emeritus type person, right? And and so it worked out. It doesn't mean like I could control my three older brothers anymore than I could in basketball when I was younger, and they used to beat me all the time.
Well, I was going to say that's interesting, isn't it? So they hand over to the younger brother, but then they're still around.
Yes, but I think we all did our best with it, and the company I think responded very well to me taking a leadership role in that regard, and also being the face of Gallagher Uniform. Dan was certainly an inside person, and so that doesn't mean I could. We all just had to still work as brothers, and so right. Pat is still an older brother, Dan's still an older brother, so you win some, you lose some.
And so it wasn't like it was suddenly all de facto you now in charge. It was you have the position, but there's still a lot of influence and a lot of sway.
Yes.
A lot of negotiation has to go on there.
With the brothers, for sure. I think I had it in the plant and tried to set direction and strategy and get people to buy in, because at the time we wanted to double the size of the company, and with these certain programs and with this type of growth, and so it was all it all worked out very well. And but then when the brothers are in the room, it's like you got your older brothers there, and you work it out.
I think I was in the middle of a few of those.
So, oh yeah. There's a few war stories from leadership coaches and counselors and everything else.
We'll push those to one side from it. So then, brother number two, Pat retires, Dan retires, and you're left now the last remaining of the fourth generation.
Yeah, so Dan retired 5 years ago. So we've got a plan at that point to, they could retire. The brothers had a pretty good buy-sell arrangement, a stockholder agreement that said you could keep your stock for 5 years. At the time we wrote it, we were all much younger, and we thought each person would have to come in and save the other three or whatever if somebody actually retired. So the 5 years have expired, and we said it's time then to fully divest. So we're going through that process right now.
Okay, and that's the process of getting the company to fund the purchase of or the buyout of the different stockholders.
Yes, the buyback of the stock. Yep.
So fourth generation, we're back to the lone John, as it was when it started all those years ago.
That's right.
But what about the fifth generation?
We're lucky to have the fifth generation with Chris and Kevin Gallagher. They're my oldest brother Mike's two sons. Chris has been with us 20 years, and Kevin probably about somewhere between 15 and 18. So it's been enjoyable to have them have some other Gallaghers to lean on and carry the name. And, it's helpful to have as much family, I think, as he can manage for people, for things like showing leadership and company parties and things like that. So and it's funny, they were the first two grandkids of the four brothers, and then I had the last. So there's almost a generation in between the fifth generation. So if any of my kids were to start, Chris has already got 20 years on them, even though they're in the fifth generation. So we'll see how it plays out.
So that kind of feels like there's a 5B generation, if you like, coming in potentially if one of your kids were to start it, or it's close to a sixth. So is there long-term intention? Would it be keep it in the family?
It has always been my personal desire to keep it in the family and not sell. One is to continue the great legacy and the story of the family name, but the other is we now have 90 souls that work for us, and as long as we can keep it going for them as well. They've got good jobs here. They've got solid jobs. There's career paths in our industry and in our company where 40 years ago you probably didn't have those type of career paths in industrial laundry, but now you really do, from sales to service to maintenance to leadership in the plant and supervision. So we're quite pleased with that, and a lot of people depend on that for a living, and it's another nice story to have along with the family legacy. So I don't want to quite give it up. So the challenge is how to make it work through the next generation or move it on to another type of leadership, that is still tied to Gallagher, but maybe not run by Gallagher's. Yeah, could be that.
So they had to hire a CEO or a president, as your term?
Yeah, that could happen. It could happen on my watch. If none of us are, I don't mind kicking back or saying, look, if there's somebody else out there that can do the job better and take it a little step further, and the three Gallaghers here aren't ready to do that, then I would have no problem with that.
Right, go back to hanging shirts.
Absolutely, go out and sell.
Yeah, and so that's the difference, isn't it, between ownership and leadership? That the ownership you would want to keep in the family, the leadership you want to be the best leadership to create value for the organization.
Correct.
Which is
well said.
I've listened to you for a while. How would that go down? I mean, you say with great pride the four generations, the history, the family name, all that kind of stuff. How would that feel to have a non-Gallagher at the helm?
I don't know. We've never had one. So, my lighting is getting bad. Hang on one second. I'll screw that out. It's getting dark out here already in the Fort Custer. No, it would be uncharted territory, and I give it a lot of thought though. But Chris and Kevin are here, and if any other family members come in, there'd certainly be Gallaghers here for the long run. So I think that's what counts, and they're both contributing greatly to the success of the company. So that's important. I can also see, you can appreciate this. When the brothers, and even when Chris and Kevin were all here together, there's 6 of us, and actually 7 with my niece Amy, who was in for a while. And, so the leadership team in the meetings was all Gallagher's, right? And now our leadership executive team, is majority run by non-Gallagher's already.
Right.
So there's Chris and Kevin and myself, but then we have 6 others that are doing great work in their respective roles.
And taking some more senior leadership positions.
Yes, yes. So, from HR manager to plant manager to maintenance, stockroom, it's not Gallagher's running the company anymore at every single touch point like it used to be. It's really good people that have developed and come in through the organization over the years.
Right.
And what's really nice is our leadership team has been they've bought into the company growth, and they are good people, and they want to do well, and they're doing well, and it's a real pleasure to see that transpire over the years. And so I can see where maybe one of them would get into even a larger role in the running of the company. Maybe not president, but maybe a senior leadership position or something. And others would have that respect coming with them because they earned it through the trenches. So
right.
I can see somebody coming inside.
Well, the way you're framing it is a sense of you broadening the what you mean by family. Even the way you express the 90 souls that you're responsible for, and my guess, if we had a bit longer to talk, is you'd talk about how they all have their families, which are all hoping for that same check and that development opportunity, that growth. So rather than it just being Gallagher's, you've got a family of people who are fairly stable within your operation.
Yes, that's true. There's a lot of areas not stable. There's that turnover,
Yes.
but no, but actually our leadership team has been together has been unchanged we're going on 3 years now, which is really pretty cool.
Yeah. And that says something for the culture that you created, that you don't have that turnover, especially in an environment, an industry like yours.
Yes, we're completely blessed in that part because there are other companies out there that we know in the industry that struggle with, you turn over a production manager, you turn over a service manager, or any of those key. It's a hands-on business. It can be pretty brutal if you are turning over your leadership.
Right. So what's one thing you wish the previous generation or generations would have done differently?
I would say the succession planning, and that which I can understand how it happened. I don't think back in the 40s or 50s or 60s people necessarily thought about it in small family businesses like ours, when there was only one Gallagher in the generation. So I think managing the succession planning might be something that we learned a lot on how to do it right, and also missed some points on that we didn't do correctly. And Dad with his illness probably would have been getting around to that, but the stroke hit, and he wasn't able to plan accordingly like maybe he would have liked to. And then that ownership leadership dynamic, needing to be crystal clear on what ownership in the plant looks like on a day-to-day basis versus leadership, and making sure everybody understands their roles and the lanes that they should be working in.
What's some of the frameworks you put around that now to maintain that difference between ownership and leadership?
Well, it's instilled in us to work that way, and it's a little easier now that I'm the last of the one generation, because Chris and Kevin, they know Uncle John, and he's a guy, and so we don't get into too many ownership leadership issues on a day-to-day basis. But when there are 4 brothers, you could all of a sudden have your ownership hat on pretty quickly out on the plant floor when you shouldn't, have it on. Right. And so over time, the brothers learned to work on that and say, there's a time to be an owner, and that's that's at our monthly meetings or whatever that we talk about these things. But you stay in your lane. You're in sales, you're in service, you're in the plant, and you can't start telling people what to do in the other guy's territory. And in addition, employees would often look at the four brothers as all being equal bosses. And so they'd come to me about getting out early, or, hey, can we do it this way? I go, who do you answer to? That's Dan. Okay. You've got to go to Dan on that one. And,
Which gets to the kind of amplification of your last name in some ways. So, if a Gallagher says it, then it must be fact, because
yes,
it doesn't matter whether they're your direct boss or somebody else.
Correct. Yeah.
Do you still see some of that with the fifth generation?
Not a little bit. I mean, you're a Gallagher. You're a Gallagher. That last name is, it's always got a little bit of a dynamic with it, but not like it used to be. So we're okay.
So then, if you look back at that, if you were starting again today, you were talking to somebody who was starting a family business, what's 3 recommendations you would strongly make to ensure their success?
Well, there's probably some different answers depending on the size and scope of the business you're talking about. If it's small and it's just one generation and another, it may be a little simpler to digest. But certainly, you've got to have a business plan and a growth strategy for the business, which anybody should have anyways, right? But then the family positions really have to be crystal clear, and that dynamic of working with family and getting that aligned with the strategy of the business. And if a family member isn't aligned to the strategy of the business and where it's going, it's going to be problematic in a number of ways. It is with any associate you have, but when it's family, it could be, you got to watch the Peter Principle and all of that. So, and I think for a family business, the family members need to really know every part of the business, not upside. And that's where a more complicated business, you can't always do that.
So in that way, you're saying there's more expected of them because they're a family member?
Well, in our case, that was our rule. Nobody works harder than a Gallagher, and nobody can complain about a Gallagher not pulling their weight, right, as a family member.
Right.
So we were very conscious about making sure, especially when we were all working in the plant, and there wasn't a sales department, service department. We were out washing clothes and doing the press and hanging shirts at the tunnel, and we literally knew every job out there, and that works today. I mean, I was just having a conversation in the lunchroom with our maintenance manager, and he goes, "So you really have done every job out in that plant?" I go, "Well, I didn't do the presses. I never did press any shirts, but ran the washout, ran the stock room, and really built most of the software that the business is running on." And so people like to hear that that the owners aren't just sitting there with a privileged position. That doesn't work here.
So that's that, and that have higher expectations of family members and be really clear about what those expectations are and what it means to have that name in the business.
Correct. And then on the more family side, is your governance model correct? Are you going to have a board of directors, for instance? That too depends on the size, but and the succession planning, nobody gets around to until it's difficult to deal with. And so we see a lot of that going on in our industry today, in terms of not just the success of the family, but of the whole organization. Not over promoting family. And if it doesn't work, you got family, let's get an upfront contract. Here's the expectations, and maybe your kids will come in, maybe they won't, because they're not just going to come in for a job if they're not really going to be able to produce.
Mm-hmm.
So we always worried about nieces or nephews coming in and going we welcome anybody to come in and try, but let's be clear that it may or may not be, what is aligned for success. So do you have an exit strategy for family members that is dignified, right, and keeps the family intact, the family relationships? So because you don't want to blow up in a plant in an organization, and we see it. I see it in colleagues every year, where the the son has left the company, the daughter has, or there's a big blow up, family counseling comes. It's tough,
Yeah.
and you got to be ready for those times and expect them. And if it happens, then do you have the right network of professionals like Humanergy and with the leadership training and how you counsel the brothers to other types of training and counseling. We're all for it. You got to have help.
Which, well, I think that's a great. You've got to have help. So surround yourself with help. That onboarding and offboarding, and having a clear structure for both. And I have a potential family business best practice book in my mind, and the title was going to be "Best Practices for Family Business," so you can still go to Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
because it's that challenge of how do I let your son go if I'm your brother and still be comfortable going to Thanksgiving where both you and your son are going to be there, and it's not going to feel awkward.
Correct. And it can be. I hear so many stories from my colleagues around the country. They clashed with their father, or the two sons or three sons that started. One's left. They bought out the others early because they weren't getting along, things like that, or they weren't just a different skill set, and one wasn't. So yeah, it's tough. You got to have those. Um, Recent one this past year, I don't think it went well, because there wasn't that structure of how are we going to work through these things.
Right.
And if there's an exit, that it's done, with the family staying intact. That's very hard to do for families.
Yeah, and I like the way you frame some of that, because in some ways it's let's not over promote people, because that sets you up for that awkward conversation. And another rule I've heard from people is don't overpay people. So if sometimes the family members can get paid more than the rest, and then they're paid too much to be able to leave.
Yes, that can happen.
But you're saying, hey, the more we frame this up, and even in some cases, I'm picking between your words, is bring them in a level below the level that they think they aspire to, and let them work up to that, rather than bringing them in and hoping.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Great way to put it.
So what's your plans for next generation then?
We're figuring that out right now, and that with Dan moving on, we've got to plan me next, maybe, and there's a timing issue on that with what the company can handle. So we've got to find that sweet spot of transitioning ownership. It might be that I gift it if my kids come into it. I think if we get some others in, like I'm recruiting every day my two that are available, and if they come in, it'll really change things up, because then Chris and Kevin have Gallagher's to rely on, like I've had Chris and Kevin to rely on. So it'll be an enormous help to the company, and I would be in a better position to just give my stock to them upon death. Fortunately, I can retire without that, and that's a good thing. And then we'd be off and running. Or we may. There's always the possibility that Chris or Kevin, that fifth generation now, aspires to the next president's position, or we all decide and say, you know what, let's get some really fresh people in here that can really grow the company differently. Because if Detroit takes off, we need another plant in a few years, and that brings on a whole different scale of work and debt and all that. So there's a lot to do, and it doesn't have to just fall on Gallagher's.
Right. You've got options that you're thinking about. I think it's interesting that a step back a few minutes ago, you said one of the most critical things is do succession planning early.
Yeah.
And in your dad's case, that was one of those. And so that's something that it sounds like you're trying to get ahead of that, but also recognize that you're not ahead of it yet.
No, and it's we knew this was going. There's two. You also have the buy, sell, and the arrangement of stock in the company, and how that. So we did a good job of putting together an agreement to handle how nieces and nephews would come in from the fifth generation, what opportunities they would have, And before they were all in middle school, right? So we were projecting that somebody's going to be coming in. And so what are the rules for them to come in? And if you want to gift your stock to them, how long do they get to keep it if they're really not contributing to the company anymore? Or they don't make the senior level leadership. And so we had all those things set up, and how the Gallaghers can exit, and the fourth generation. And it was really, we're quite proud of it. And a lot of companies have in our industry have looked at us and said, at least you guys figured out how you could all kind of manage to move on nicely without too much fighting. And I wouldn't say we didn't fight over it, but we gave it all came out for the best. Yeah.
And you still get to
I
hang
got
out at
my
Thanksgiving.
succession planning to do personally
Yeah.
for the next president of the company, but then we also have the stock value and who it's going to and all that,
Right.
and how that would get paid for and not get paid for and so forth. So there's kind of two plans that got to be.
Do you have
out.
a rule? You said you had a rule that if you're not active in the company, there's a limit to how long you can hold on to stock?
Yes, there was that. So the brother could leave stock to a niece or a nephew, and then they could have it for a certain period of time. But if you really weren't in the hunt, then you couldn't hang on to it.
Right.
So the people that are working and making the company go are the ones that are going to, keep it in the end.
Right. And I think that's a smart tactic, isn't it? Let's make sure ownership and leadership are tied to a great degree, so that there isn't the awkwardness of having those in conflict.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you still get to hang out at Thanksgiving.
And we still get to hang out at Thanksgiving. And that was one. Go ahead.
No, you were saying?
The thing that we always tried to do the most was make sure we could talk to each other at the end of the day and go to the family Christmas party. And that was driven by how mom and dad raised us, right? So honoring your folks, that they want to see their four boys get along, and the faith that they also instilled in us with our religious values, and and you just try to be humble. Those were the kind of the three things that I recall. When a heated argument or session or board meeting, we still say, okay, let's pop a beer now, let's relax and shake hands, and we'll see you tomorrow. So
after you've all prayed on it.
Yeah. My mom kept very busy with the prayers. So did Dad. Yeah.
Hey, John Gallagher, Gallagher Uniform in Battle Creek. Thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanergy, go to humanergy.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.